This episode of the Future Media Podcast is brought to you by Avid Collective, building the global home of branded content.
Hello and welcome to the Future Media Podcast. My name's Ricky Sutton. Here on this podcast, I talk to interesting people and I report on the collision of big media and big tech with some real life stories and some new innovations thrown in to spice things up. Good morning and welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton. This week, I woke to an email from both of the people on this call telling me that the Canadian government had resumed its advertising on Meta. And that came as a real surprise to me because Canada's really been at the forefront of pushing back on social media and on big tech and making them be a more better behaved corporate citizen. Canada's been focused very much on an online news act to enable more money to be spent on professional news media in Canada. And when this was first flagged, Meta's response was to throw its toys out of the pram and ban all news content in Canada during a national crisis of bushfires. And I've been to Canada, I've sat down and spoken to many publishers, and along that journey, two people have emerged as being at the very spearhead of this battle to ensure that big tech behaves well in Canada and represents a fight for the people and the publishers there. And those two are Paul Deegan, who joins me today from News Media Canada, and Lisa Sigatek, who is from the Crow's Nest Past Herald, who I think many of you already know is the figurehead of a $4 billion class action against Google. So, what's going on here? Paul, I think your email landed 3.5 seconds before Lisa's. Please tell me, what's going on here and what's the latest?
Thanks, Ricky. It's great to be with you and with my friend Lisa. We were shocked. The Canadian government introduced the Online News Act a few years ago, and when the act passed Parliament, Meta decided not to compensate publishers. Google, to their credit, did, and they're now paying us $100 million a year indexed to inflation. But with Meta, under the Online News Act, if you don't compensate publishers, you cannot carry our content on your platform. So they opted not to pay and basically, sort of ran away with their marbles. And as you pointed out earlier, they did it in the middle of wildfire season in Canada. And, obviously Facebook is an important way for Canadians to get information. So we were really disappointed. And then the Canadian government said, okay, if you're not doing that, we're not going to advertise with you. And a number of other governments in Canada did the same thing. The BC government, the Quebec government, several large municipalities and some corporations as well. But we were stunned to learn about a week ago that the government is resuming advertising with Meta at a time when we're in the middle of a trade dispute with the United States, essentially a tariff war brought on by the Americans. Why are we rewarding an American company and seeing ad dollars from the taxpayer? These are taxpayer-funded ad dollars flowing to California when they should be invested in Canada.
I think that's fair. Lisa, don't want to get on the wrong side of you because I know you can be quite fiery when it's on a topic that you care about, but I'm going to set the scene just so everybody's aware. You run a very small local newspaper that you're deeply passionate about. Your family's been in the community for 5 generations. You and I have spoken a lot on stage, in person, on global media. You've become a global face for this fight on behalf of publishers. Your argument was plain and simple. You need to earn a certain amount of advertising to be able to sustain your coverage and write about the community in which you live and represent them. You can't get that money because large global corporations who frankly don't give a toss about your community come in and take your money and don't enable you to do that. And now your government is saying, hey, that's fine, actually. Do you know what? We'll just do it. So I'm going to stand back now and just ask you how that feels.
It's just like one piss off after another, to be quite honest with you. It's so annoying I'll take it one step further. I mean, Meta's not fact checking anything anymore. So anything you actually see on their platform, you don't know if it's a truth or a lie. You don't know what's the actual answers to anything. It's somebody's opinion. Nobody's checking it. And so I feel like the federal government in this country has rewarded them for that, to say, you're so important, we're going to do our advertising with you, but it's okay if your information's wrong. It's okay if you lie. It's okay. All of these things come together, and you're just wondering to yourself, where's the truth in anything anymore? And if the government's saying that they believe in this platform, then it's telling the rest of our country, hey, go to Facebook and get your information. It could be wrong, but go there anyway, because that's what we think is where people are at. So for me, it's just it's one disgusting, carnival after another, and I don't even know what to say about it anymore. I'm so disgusted by the entire experience.
All right, so let's fix it. So I want to just go back a step. And before we came on air, I was telling the both of you that in the last 6 or 8 weeks, I've had a series of very, very eye-opening conversations about the ways that the news industry globally has typically fought this big tech takeover, okay? And it's generally been that we are outraged by this as an industry, which we're allowed to be, okay? And then also that we're being damaged and that our ability to do our job is disappearing. And that's also completely reasonable. But that strategy hasn't worked at all for any day of the last 25 years, okay, as we've been systematically steamrolled. And so the strategy of being sad, indignant, doesn't work. But through the work that we've all been doing and that I've been diving deeper and deeper into, there is a very real argument as to why this shouldn't happen that go beyond, way beyond indignation. Okay. And so let's talk about a couple of those, because these are very important. And top of that list, the first thing I'd say is this. When a country takes taxpayers' ads dollars, which this is government ad funding, and gives it to a foreign company, in this case Meta, and that company is domiciled for tax in some low tax haven offshore, a dollar that a Canadian has handed to the Canadian government is then handed to Meta, and then that dollar passes down a digital pipe offshore and outside the Canadian border and away to heaven only knows where, and it's never coming back. And so it's a dollar spent and a dollar gone, which means it's a dollar lost to the economy and the GDP of Canada. And when this is trillions of dollars, or sorry, not trillions, billions of dollars, okay, from Canada going to these tech companies, those are billions of dollars lost. And I often wonder, and this is a question, I'm couching a question in a complicated way, but I'm trying to be very scientific about the question, is that when a politician in Quebec is asked by a voter why they can't have the hospital they've been promised, and the answer is, we don't have the money for it. Last year, enough money for that hospital went to Google and to Meta. What do you think about that? Do you think people realize that that's the truth? Paul?
I don't think Canadians understand. So the government of Canada last year, for example, spent a little over $75 million on advertising. And if you look at what actually went to print publishers, we can't actually tell what went to news. There may be some digital advertisements that went to news, although speaking with publishers, I know it's not much. But all print publications in the country combined, it was just 2% of that. So there's a very small amount of money. They spent, 3 times that, for example, on LinkedIn alone. So they're not reinvesting in Canadian journalism, in Canadian newspapers, which fund the journalism, which the journalists who produce the content, and that's really what's needed. But instead, we're seeing this money flowing away. It's interesting. If you look, one of the things that we were looking at on the advertising problem a while ago is trying to get the idea of a government earmark. And so I spoke with Steve Waldman, who both of you know at Rebuild Local News. And Steve had pointed me to what New York City had done. And so we actually got the government of Ontario, which is our largest province, to earmark 25% of the provincial ad spend. That's both for the government and for the crown corporations that they own, the liquor store, the cannabis store, the lottery corporation. And this is like a large ad buy between all of those entities. I believe it's about $200 million a year. So getting 25% of that going to essentially local newspapers, it's making a massive difference right now. And so we've been calling on the federal government to do that as well, and other provincial and municipal governments. But, if you want to have a viable news media ecosystem, governments, corporations have to advertise with us. There's no question about it. And when you're sending your dollars south, you're doing absolutely nothing to support news, but also that money, as you pointed out, isn't sort of reinvested in the economy. You've got journalists who then pay income taxes. You got the businesses who pay taxes that fund all of the social services that Canadians value.
Lisa, do you pay tax?
I do. We pay a lot of tax in our country, yes.
How are you feeling about that today?
Well, I think Paul tied it in, and I think we could take it another step further when we talk about the payout that we're getting from Google. So each newspaper in the country that's an actual verified newspaper, so we're not talking magazines or digital or anything, we're talking like newspapers. Because of the Google payout, each newspaper is getting money, and it's almost enough money to pay for the salary of a half reporter. So because of the Google money now, I'm able to actually hire somebody out of school to be a second reporter who's going to pay taxes, he's going to live in my community, he's going to buy groceries, he's going to support the community. And because of that Google money, rightly so given to the newspapers in which it's taking the news from, I'm able to invigorate my economy. It's going to be the opposite with Meta. So when the government decides not to spend its money locally, that multiplier is gone. So for every $1 spent, I don't know what the multiplier is right now, it used to be 3, but so for every dollar spent, that's $3 that we would get into our economy, and now that's completely gone. And so, when the government says that you're not important enough, your federal government, because the provincial governments are different. And I think that that's a hands-off thing. I think when you have a municipal government, you have to look your constituents in the face. So you're going to decide things a little bit different. On a provincial level, again, it's just a little bit closer. Federally, it's so far away that they're missing the connect between the person in your country and the information that you want to get out. And so they're completely missing a whole demographic of people that they're choosing to spend their money on social media. And quite frankly, when you talk to people or children my age, kids my age, they're not even going on Meta. They have no interest in Meta at all. So they're missing that whole group of kids. And it's going to, if anything, it's going to shrink the economy just as much as the tariffs are going to shrink our economy. We're already on a downward spiral. They're just adding another, nail in the coffin.
Okay. So, as I said, indignation is a shitty business model and a shittier strategy. Title of my book. The fact here is that the government's job is to look out for the citizens of the nation. Okay? The same federal government that is decided to drop its ad ban and to renew its ad ban is the same federal government that was lambasting Meta with invective after it decided to black out community announcements that were life-saving community announcements during the wildfires that you had a few years ago. So we have a government that, on one hand, when it suited political needs, outrage, and now with an election a few months away, has completely reversed its position. Smacks a little of self-interest, and I appreciate it's very, very difficult for you guys, given the jobs that you're doing, to talk about that. But looking at it from a purely logical perspective, it fails what we in Australia call the pub test. If you went and asked 15 people in the pub what they thought, they'd all say the same thing. That's what it feels like to me. So I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you a difficult question on that. But what I'm going to say, what I am going to ask is this. Take us back to the wildfires. Take us back to actually what happened. Because again, let's look at the facts, the things that no one disputes. What happened and what did Meta do? Paul, can I throw it to you for that, please? And give it to me in detail as it kind of transpired.
Sure, and I'll toss to Lisa because she's actually geographically closer to fires were in Western Canada. But during the summer 2 years ago, we were facing like just ravaging forest fires across Canada in large parts of the country, but concentrated in a number of areas. And with that, during that period, Meta actually then just said, we're not paying, and therefore we're not carrying news. One of the issues is Meta and Google had done deals before the Online News Act with a number of large publishers, and those deals hadn't expired. And I believe there was a clause in some of the agreements that said something like if there's legislation or regulation, deals off. But the Online News Act hadn't kind of been finalized yet because you needed this regulatory process to take place. So they basically were still contractually obligated to carry news. So anyway, with those large publishers at least, they did continue to honor that. But it's just, I mean, it was just like a PR disaster from, I think from a Meta perspective. Like, why would you cut off news during that period when you didn't have to? And, looking at it now in terms of the government, if you think of sort of, brand safety and brand sustainability, why are you advertising with a brand which is basically spewing sewage constantly? We did a survey just before Christmas, and we asked 2,200 Canadians, what they think about a few different things. And one of the questions was, do you trust advertising in newspapers? The answer was 63%. If you look at it on Facebook and Instagram, it was 28%. We also asked them in terms of, how do you actually want to get information about government programs? 58% wanted to hear from their newspapers, and while only 17% chose Facebook and Instagram. So I think we're a preferred medium to get news. We're more trusted, and yet the government has done this crazy thing with resuming advertising with Meta in the middle of a tariff war.
Yeah, agreed. Lisa, tell me about the personal stories of those fires, because we can get lost in business and we can get lost in big narratives, right? But I was taught when I was a local news reporter that every single thing we did was always about people, right? If it wasn't about people, don't write it. Yeah, and I know you know that. We're not in you're doing it from home, not from your office today. But whenever we talk in your office, you've got all your front pages emblazoned on the wall behind you. So I know that you care about that. These wildfires, it's easy to forget. I remember the satellite pictures that showed like all of Canada and North America under a pall of smoke. It was one of the most astonishing things you'd ever seen. Frightening, chilling. Tell me about the real experience on the ground for people, and to personalize it, because when Meta decides to go dark and not cover this and not tell people where they need to be or what emergency exits are available to them and what they need to do, people's lives are being put at risk for a profit line. Explain to me, please, how people on the ground reacted and what was happening.
Well, it's complete panic. So the wildfire in Jasper National Park, which is, just north of me by about 5 hours, it was unbelievable. I had people. It was interesting for me. I had people from Jasper calling the Crow's Nest Pass because we had a wildfire in the past, and somehow they knew who I was. So they were calling me to get information. Because there was no information. The local newspaper was doing a great job. They were out there, boots to the ground, but they didn't have that ability to give real-time information. So where their place came in was they were on the ground. They were catching the stories as they were coming through. They just couldn't get them fast enough uploaded for what the people needed. So we needed that interface with Facebook, and they completely let those those people down, to the point where, you know, there was such a sense of panic within the community. But what I think is even more interesting is, even had Facebook been there, even if they would have covered it at that point and given the emergency stuff, they wouldn't have cared what happened after the fact. And that's where people get lost in these types of situations, is what happens after the fact. Where do you get help? Who do you go to? And you know who's covering those stories? The local print media in that area. They're the ones informing the public to say, hey, this is where you can go to get help. This is where you're going to go for the next step and the next step and the next step. And so they're giving them a sense of peace and a sense of safety that you wouldn't even have gotten from Meta at the time. So not only did they throw the people away at the time, they wouldn't have been there for the future. But the local print news was and is and will still be there.
I actually think that the general members of the public, and this is borne out by your data, Paul, it's also borne out by your experiences, Lisa, it's also borne out by my experiences, is that ordinary people in the street have a fundamental understanding that local media should exist and that it should get a fair share of the revenue, and that the big tech companies are more interested in profits than they are in people, and that they should not be as rich as they are. I think that's just general common sense. I think everyone in the world recognizes that that's a reality. We have a situation, though, where we've constructed a model for capitalism that means that the money, it goes to one place. It flows in the fastest pipe. And the fastest pipe at the moment is the organizations like Google and Meta that have created a automation system that works like a vacuum cleaner. It just sucks up everything. And, you know, one of the things that I hear a lot from publishing companies is there's no growth in our industry. That's not true. The advertising market is growing in double digits, but every single dollar of that increased ad spend is going automatically down the pipe to Google and Meta. When I sit down and I talk to the advertising agencies that send the money down the pipe, their response is they're our biggest enemy because they beat us up on price, but they're also our largest customer and where we make all our money. And if they went away, we'd be out of business. So what you have got is unquestionably monopoly. And monopoly that is at the cost of people, because we've just talked about the very real world problem where this impacts on the consumer. All right. And let's go back to the pub test. Does that make sense? Should it continue? Answer is 10 out of 10 no. So we do have antitrust actions underway, which is good. We do have government actions around the world, which is good. One of the first to act in one of those government actions was Canada. Canada was very brave. It was in a different political era. Fast forward 2 years, you have a 180-degree reversal. They're now pointed in an entirely different direction. That feels like a betrayal, not just of publishers, but it also feels like a betrayal of the public. What is the political situation in Canada? Because, you know, while I have a lot of readers in Canada, about a third of my readers actually are from North America and Canada. What is the political situation currently in Canada? What's driving this change, do you think? I'll go to you first, Lisa.
Well, I think there's some panic. I mean, we have a standing party that's coming up for re-election in a few months, and the polls have said that there's going to be a massive loss. Now, those polls are changing. They're changing quickly to where the Liberal Party, under a potential new leader, could give the Conservatives in this country a really good fight for the next election. And so I think that they feel that their best medium to get their message across is to spend money in Google and Facebook. It's the only thing I can think about, and the only reason why that they would do a complete disservice by going back to that medium that has been so horrible to this country in many ways. I mean, they spend no money in the country. They hire no people in the country. They refuse to pay for the news that they're taking from the newspapers in this country. They turned their back on every emergency that we had. And yet we go back and we reward them for that, for that service, which really says a lot about the existing government, to tell you the truth, because if they can go back on their word They held them accountable, and then they completely did an about face. So if they're going to go back on their word on that, what else are they going to go back on their word about for the sake of winning an election? And for me, that's what it all comes down to. If they want to advertise personally, you go spend your money where you want. But when you're using my taxpayer dollar, do it in an ethical, responsible way that makes my country shine, not giving our money down to somebody in the United States of America whose president feels the need to try to break our country.
Well said. Paul?
So the polls are a little all over the place right now. So to be honest, I don't know where things are going to wind up with the next election. What I will say though is the Trump tariff action, his crazy talk about Canada becoming the 51st state and referring to our prime minister as Governor Trudeau and all of that. Canadians have got their backs up on that, and so I think for politicians who are seen standing up to the United States right now, that's good politics in Canada. And there's a whole Buy Canadian movement that's underway in Canada. At our liquor stores, for example, there's signs next to the the bourbon from Kentucky. There's the bottle of Canadian rye, Crown Royal, and there's signs that say Buy Canadian. So I think there's a renewed sense of Canadian patriotism, of Buy Canadian, and I think you're going to see people reevaluating decisions on a whole host of things, including advertising. One of the large newspapers a number of our members have all been pushing us, and we're going to be launching a campaign which is basically Buy Canadian, advertise local. And I think that's good to get the message out. It's one thing at the grocery store, if you see, some produce from Ontario versus California, that's easy enough. Sometimes on the B2B side of it, people don't think about where they're buying. I think companies are starting to realize that. I mean, they're slapping like 25% duties on steel and aluminum from around the world, including Australia, which is a large producer as well. These are things that people are pushing back on. And so we're optimistic that people are going to, when they look at their own advertising budget, they're going to be spending with the home team.
Lisa, do you love your community?
Oh, with all my heart. I think I call it that I live in the Garden of Eden on a regular basis. Yes, I do.
So I asked this question. I don't know if you saw the podcast. I was talking to some Australian publishers. Lisa, you were on it, and I asked you this question. Do you love your community? I think people. It's going to sound a ridiculous thing to say, but it feels pertinent to say, given the broken economic structures that we've managed to get ourselves to, which is that people are inherently human and inherently good. Okay. And I think most people want to live in a community where they feel loved, cared for, included. Yeah, I think that's fair. I go out of here, I go and get my cup of coffee, I bump into 4 people at the coffee shop next door who all want to know who I am. If I try and walk with my wife and my kids from my house to the supermarket, we will not get there for an hour because so many people will want to have a chat. No one gives any shits on Meta. And we've created a thing that's meant to be a social network to enable us to talk to each other and communicate. But what it's actually become is the world's second largest advertising company. And if your objective is solely to sell ads and not to connect people, okay, then your raison d'etre, the reason you're here, your mission statement no longer stands up to scrutiny. Okay, so you cannot have a situation. I'm just looking at on the wall. I have all the numbers on my wall just here. So Meta, $134.9 billion plus 16% in the past quarter. In its announcements, it talked about net income and increasing ad prices and increasing ad load and capex and how many staff it has. It didn't mention once anything at all in its statement about what it does or how it improves the world for its users. Not one word. None. In fact, I'll do an investigation. I will make a commitment to do an investigation now to go back through all their quarterly reports and see when was the last time they actually mentioned a single customer on their platform. We've reached a situation of pure cynicism, okay? And so if you care about your community, Paul, I'm going to ask you, do you love your community? Are you a proud Canadian?
100%.
What does it mean for you?
I mean, being a Canadian, I think, is about a sense of looking out for each other. We've got a social safety net that doesn't exist in the United States. I think that's part of our culture. We've got a beautiful country. It's diverse in terms of population, and it's diverse in terms of the physical geography of the country. I mean, it's stunning. And I think Canadians love Canada. We've got a lot of friends and family in the United States, all of us. We love the US too. And, we think it's good for Americans to be proud of being American, but Canadians are proud of being Canadian. And that's part of what defines us. It's a cold weather country. I think there's a little, adversity that people go through because of that. And, there's a love of outdoors, playing pond hockey. There is nothing better than that. And, from coast to coast, I think Canadians love the country. And this renewed tiff with the U.S., it's just increasing Canadian pride.
Yeah. So we have a collision of politics and profits is where I'm effectively heading here.
Do you know, Ricky, just quickly, my brother lives in the U.S. So my brother lives in Idaho. And he doesn't love me any less because I'm a Canadian. And I don't love him any different, even though he lives in the U.S. So I don't think it's a person-to-person thing. I think it's a politician-to-a-politician issue. And I think it gets mired in that conversation. When you see, I was actually quite disgusted with Canada when they booed an NHL hockey team that was playing in Canada. That it's not about the people. This is decisions made by politicians, not people. Just like when Meta makes decisions, they're not making decisions on the best interest of the people in their country. They're just making a business decision.
That is correct. I often talk about the collision of dollars and cents, SENSE. If all your intention is to get more dollars, then often the cents goes by the wayside. Yeah. So in 58 days' time, Meta faces a Federal Trade Commission antitrust trial in America. The demand of the FTC is that Instagram and WhatsApp are removed, are broken up from Meta, that Meta can own the entire social space. It's actually fascinating, as come no surprise to you guys, I'm sure, but I've read all the evidence bundle, and it very clearly states there are emails from Mark Zuckerberg, the Meta CEO, explicitly saying that, well, we can't possibly allow Instagram to continue to grow. We have to get rid of it, or otherwise it's going to be a competitor. And then he bought it for $1 billion. And then he bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. Okay. And according to the FTC's evidence, didn't send anybody to actually do a valuation of the company until weeks and weeks and weeks later, after he bought it. So it's going to be a colourful case. But also included in that case is a whole load of evidence about how Meta built itself deliberately to be addictive. And it seems that the addiction doesn't only spread to teens, it also spreads to your politicians. Okay? And so when the commercial model becomes so overwhelming that it can't be stopped, then effectively it crashes into the law, like a tidal wave that comes all the way across the ocean, destroying everything in its path until it hits a rock. Yeah? So this may be the point of change. Who knows? We'll find out. It's a very interesting political world at the moment. But look, finally, final word. from you both. I'll go to you first, Paul. Two questions. Number one, what's your core message to government? Okay, first of all, to government about why this is a flawed policy.
So first of all, it's inconsistent with where the government has been. And our government has been terrific in terms of supporting the media sector, the Online News Act, labor tax credits. They've been very, very supportive of the sector. And advertising with Meta, which is basically a pipe of sewage, is inconsistent with your support of news media. So what we're saying to them is take those dollars and instead of investing them in a California-based company that is, firing fact checkers, invest those monies in Canadian news media.
How many people does it employ? Does Meta employ in Canada?
I mean, they've got a functional office here. I don't know how many they'd have, but it's not a ton.
How many does the news industry employ?
The news industry, just on sort of journalists alone, would in total would be 10,000, let's call it, and then you've got other jobs outside of journalists in terms of the overhead jobs and other functions.
Lisa, you've got the Prime Minister in front of you and you can't go anywhere. The doors are locked.
He would try.
What do you say?
I said he'd try to get away, but I wouldn't let him. I would just, and I think I need to reiterate what Paul said, is the Liberal government of Canada has been incredibly good with news media. They really have. I mean, they've supported us. They created the online act. They've done a lot of really good things when it comes to supporting what I call traditional media. Where I don't understand is why it's flipping now. And I think I would want to hear from his mouth why he's putting so much stock in that vehicle of information versus media that is a Canadian-owned entity. Because you're doing a double speak when you do what you're doing. And if you want to have that Canadian pride and you want to believe in what you're doing, you need to walk the walk and you need to talk the talk. And that's not happening right now. So I want to understand where they're coming from, because I honestly can't figure it out. Today is Valentine's Day, but today is also the anniversary. It's 8 years since the owner of the Pass Herald passed away. And he died in my arms 8 years ago today. And I live in a community of 5,000 people, and over 1,000 people showed up for his funeral. And they showed up for his funeral because he ran that newspaper for 37 years of his life. He gave that community that newspaper for that many years. Meta doesn't give a shit. They don't care at all about your community in any way, shape, or form. But the people who run newspapers, they really give a shit about your community. And those are your voters. Those are the people that want to believe in your government. Those are the people that are going to go out there and support you. And we need our government to look back at the people and say, we support you as well.
Thank you for sharing, Lisa. Powerful words as always. Look, I want to just round up with some thoughts from a global perspective from me. So the first thing I'd say is that every country in the world needs its economy to fly. Otherwise, the country goes into recession and goes into a spiral. And so the amazing thing about the globalization of the world is that we've been able to use the internet and other methodologies to be able to create an intricate network of multiply supportive business models and commercial models that enables the whole world to thrive and benefit from human genius wherever it may be. Okay, that's what's meant to happen. Okay, and it's kind of worked for 25 years. But the way that it's worked is to reduce the tax burden on the largest companies to get them to hire more people, and the concept that the benefit of that will flow down to everyone. And that's usually meant that people will be fairly laissez-faire. I know you speak a bit of French in Canada, but a little bit easy on the rules around taxation. And the biggest companies of the world are the biggest beneficiaries of that. But what's happened is that that's now had the effect of making the big companies so incredibly rich that everyone else in the world has very little. And we get to a situation where 80% of the value of the world effectively, and certainly probably more than that in terms of the growth of the world, goes to a dozen tech companies around the world and not to you and I and to the people on the ground floor living on the streets. Okay. And this is now being broken by antitrust. But for every nation state, it feels an imperative right now more than ever to try and keep as much of your money within your borders. And that means not giving it to multinationals who will use offshore tax. And so I know that feels really cold and boring and technical, but it is important and it is one of the biggest failings. And I worry about that. So look, amazing. Thank you. Keep up your good work. Have I missed anything? Was there anything you wanted to add?
I think other than we're going to court right away. So hopefully the rest of the world will see where we're going to be in our court case against Google.
I'll be watching, I promise.
And Ricky, just a big shout out and thank you to our Australian friends. I mean, what Rod Sims did, that really showed us the way. And, we can't thank our friends in Australia enough. I talk to publishers there all the time, and they've been so generous with their time, and they've really guided us on this journey.
Well, we'd love to see you there in person.
That's such a good point. We have to do that call out. We have to, as an industry, we're not just regional industries or country industries. We're a world of industries, of this industry all over the world. We need to band together as a group, and we need to fight for our right and the privilege that we have given the world with the proper information. We've been there, we're tried and tested, we've done all of our work. We need to band together as an industry throughout the world. And if we do that, that's when the real power comes through.
Couldn't agree more. So if you add together all of the publishers of the world and the audiences of all the publishers of the world, we're larger than Meta and larger than Google. We are the bigger elephant, but at the moment we're fighting as individuals and not collectively. And I have no doubt that we will figure that out.
With your help, I think so. Thank you, Ricky. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.